I wanted to talk to you about a book that I wrote some time back called Alaska Dynasty. This book is about a couple who sell out all of their possessions and move to Alaska in an attempt to try to homestead and live off the land. This book is filled with adventures, danger, and all kinds of events that they have to live through to succeed. I encourage you to try it out. I have an excerpt following this video. Thank you.
Tom and Lucas knew they had little time to spare and quickly shook hands all around before disappearing out the door. The guys all swore they would come back next year and try to make it earlier in the season. Lucas and Tom both knew they had to hurry. It would be a challenge, but they had little choice other than buying new snow machines and traveling overland. They pulled anchor and untied the boat in record time. The boat had heat in the cabin, and they would need it in the night temperatures they would be facing on the way back. They maneuvered the boat to the center of the river, knowing the currents were stronger there and the water was deeper there and less likely to have ice that went too deep. Tom took his position behind the wheel after the engines had warmed, and then he eased forward. Lucas stood right by the windows to watch for the ice dangers as Tom pushed through the waters at about half speed. They could hear the smaller pieces of ice hit the boat as they guided it around to miss the bigger pieces, while the smaller ones continued to pound the boat hull. Their running lights were on, and they used a spotlight in the front to illuminate icebergs in the distance. They didn't think the river would have any traffic, figuring most native Alaskans would be smart enough not to be out here in the current weather conditions. The bow split the water as they continued toward home. They would hear a loud thud against the starboard side if they got too close to the shore. Tom corrected for that and kept going. Lucas said, "The good news is it is a clear night and we have good visibility." Then he added, "That also means it will get a lot colder." Tom replied, "That is great news. We will be able to see the iceberg that sinks the boat." Lucas said, "Just keep it slow and steady. We aren't running a race. We are trying to make it home." Their passageway got narrow in a few places, and they could hear the creaks of the wood as they squeezed their way through. The moon was shining and helping to light the way with the reflections on the ripples of the river currents. They didn't have many small icebergs in the way when they were squeezing through the narrow passageway. Once they got into open waters, they could hear the assault of the smaller icebergs. Tom kept his hands on the wheel, no matter how sweaty they were or how nervous he was beginning to be. He had heard so many stories about men who didn't make it on the icy river. He also knew that if the boat wrecked and took on water, hypothermia would set in quickly. He doubted they would know what hit them. They certainly wouldn't have time to worry about what was happening. The constant barrage of icebergs against the boat sounded something like hailstones hitting a tin roof, and just as constant. It was a nerve-testing condition, and tension was high. In the mix of smaller thuds against the boat, they heard a loud crack in the front starboard side. Lucas said, "I will go and see what that was and hope it isn't anything too bad." Lucas walked out in that part of the boat where the crack came from, while Tom watched him from the captain's position. Lucas was working frantically, trying to stop the water from seeping in through the crack. What was worse, the hull was weakening at that spot, and if it gave way, their boat would be flooded with thousands of gallons of icy water. Lucas had plenty of winter gear on and decided getting home might require some drastic measure. He took a seat and pushed his back up against the hull to try to hold it together while they traveled through the dangerous icy waters. Tom could see what Lucas was doing and slowed even more to help the boat hold together. Lucas could feel every hit against the hull, all the way through his parka and into his long johns. It was mostly vibration, but his body against the hull helped to absorb the energy from every strike. Lucas kept in position even through some steering maneuvering that almost tossed him out of the boat. They had wasted no time getting on their journey, and the water was freezing more than it had been when they started. The icebergs kept getting bigger. Lucas was feeling the pressure of trying to just get home. His back was taking hit after hit as he continued to push backwards, trying to save the hull. Occasionally there was a big strike against the boat, and Lucas would push back against the hull, hoping it would be good enough to last. Lucas knew the cracks in the hull were getting wider and the water was seeping in greater amount. It flowed in behind Lucas as he held firm against the hull, as thud after thud pounded against him, with only the hull between him and the icy waters outside. Lucas was sitting in a puddle now, as water started filling into the bottom of the boat. Lucas estimated that there was about 1.5 inches of water filling the entire bottom of the boat now. Even though Lucas had good winter clothes on, the water he was sitting in was beginning to seep through. He had fears now of just how long he could last. If his clothes became soaked through, his odds of hypothermia were close to 100%. No one was more aware of that than Lucas himself. The pressure against his back was ever increasing, and Lucas could feel the cracked boards push deeper into his flesh. Tom was the first to notice the sky grow darker. Lucas saw it soon after and glanced up. Clouds were covering over the moon, and they would no longer have an additional light source. The good news was that the cloud cover would help hold whatever heat they had, and that might save the boat from further injury. Lucas finally heard another crack and felt even more water pour in. Finally, one of the main boards broke completely, and in spite of Lucas's efforts, the water level in the boat rose at a quicker pace. Lucas couldn't hold the water back with that large of an opening. He got up and moved away from the break. Tom stopped the boat and went to inspect the damage himself. The hole in the hull was about 6 inches across and about the same vertically. Tom noticed that as soon as they stopped the boat, the water stopped pouring in. Tom glanced over the side and noticed the water level from the river was below the hole, which was at the top of the hull. Tom knew when they started moving, the hull would go down lower and the water would again rush in. Tom said, "I have an idea. If we move all of our supplies and whatever else we can find to the back of the boat, it will hold the bow up higher and allow us to move through the water without taking on more water. It will be a rougher ride, but we are going slowly and we haven't got far to go." Lucas said, "It's worth a try." Both men worked as fast as possible to get the weight moved to the back, and the bow did come up several inches. When that job was finished, Tom said, "Get in the cabin and warm up. This will be a long night." Lucas said, "It already has been." Tom started the boat forward again, ever so slowly, and the boat dipped back down, but not as far as it was. An occasional splash came over, but not the steady flow they originally thought. Lucas took his soaked coat and pants off and sat in front of the cabin heater trying to warm up. He had started shivering and knew they were almost too late. The warmth finally penetrated the long johns that Lucas was trying to dry. He had the long johns on, but hoped they would dry while he wore them. His pants, socks, and boots were all warming by the fire. Lucas knew things were still critical. The boat still took on additional water, and it would be a contest to see if the boat would sink before they made it back. They still sustained hits from the small icebergs, but Tom hoped at the low speeds the damage would be minimal. The cracks on the starboard hull were getting ever wider. Lucas was fearful, but didn't understand why the Sacco soundtrack knife shower scene kept playing in his head. He thought if he was making a movie, that would be the sound that he would be playing now. Tom carefully and slowly drove the boat through the troubled waters. It felt like they were only moving by inches, and their bodies was feeling exhaustion waving over them. The rapids from the river slapped against the side of the boat. The icebergs continued to hammer at the hull, but they moved forward, trying to reach their destination. They knew if they didn't get the boat home tonight, it would probably be lost forever. They both knew even if they got the boat back, they couldn't make any repairs until spring. The trip from town normally was a little over 2 hours. This trip had been 6 hours so far and was yet to be done. It was grueling, and they needed rest. Lucas noticed the water in the boat was beginning to ice over. That meant it was getting colder. The river water was becoming more like slush than water. They were still pushing through little by little. Tom knew if they stopped now, they would be frozen in place in a matter of minutes. Both men stayed in the cabin, both for warmth and to keep the weight distributed in the back. The river was slushy, the water inside the boat was freezing, and Tom noticed snowflakes beginning to fall. Lucas just shook his head in disbelief. The only thing they needed now was the boat to catch on fire. There was very little conversation between Tom and Lucas, and that was unusual. Normally, they never shut up, but the tension right now was so high that they had no words to speak. They knew they were in critical condition. Lucas had escaped frostbite and hypothermia and was in good spirits, but he knew the seriousness of their situation. He cracked jokes when they were chased by bears, but nothing funny came to mind at this moment in time. Tom was beginning to see familiar scenery along the shoreline and was finally excited that he and Lucas might reach safety after all. He had begun to have serious doubts, so this was a turn for improvement. Like teeth through a snow cone, the bow of the boat continued to split the soft slush in front of them. Lucas thought he saw the cabin in the distance, but the thing he found confusing was he saw lights in the windows. Unless one of the hunters had left one on, the window should be dark. Maybe they had a squatter, or maybe they simply had someone who got in trouble in a storm and sought shelter. They would investigate it, but they had to make it there first. The slushy water made it harder for the propellers to turn, but at the slow speed they traveled, they hadn't put any pressure on the equipment. They could finally see the dock just ahead, and Tom was careful to ease up beside it so Lucas could tie the boat off. He threw out an anchor, even though he knew the boat would be froze in place before morning. Tom killed the engine and took a deep breath. The sigh that escaped his lips told him what he was feeling. Lucas had an expression that was priceless. He looked at Tom and said, "That was close." Tom replied, "Yeah, too close. We have to be more careful next year. I think 2 hunting parties are too many." They gathered their gear and carefully walked across the slick, frozen bottom of the boat that was getting covered by snow quickly. They took some meat stash they had from the boat freezing compartments and brought it with them. They may be snowed in at the cabin for a couple of days, and they needed to have food. The next thing on the agenda was to find out who was at the cabin. They tried to tell by looking through the window in the back, but whoever it was seemed to be in a different room. They moved slowly and quickly in case that someone who could be dangerous. Both Tom and Lucas carried their weapons as they made their way around the side of the cabin. When they managed to get to the front of the cabin, they saw 2 snow machines there, and Tom looked at Lucas and asked, "Isn't that the girl's snow machine?" Lucas answered, "Yes, it definitely is. Let's go see what's up."